A man slips on his sneakers, opening the door. A breeze warms him, a grin inching across his face. He felt like he was floating. He had just moved into his house, an upgrade from the cheap apartment he had been living in for the past few months. The scenery around his house was beautiful, a large woodland occupying the neighborhood. Everyone around him seemed nice so far. One neighbor, Lacey, had brought him an apple pie. A nice gesture, but he was told to never trust food strangers gave him. He decided to go on a walk, hoping to take in the few summer days left of the year. Trees circled around him as he walked. He enjoyed nature. It was calming, and it reminded him of when he was young. Him and his father had spent years of their lives in forests, studying the types of trees: hickory, oak, maple, willow, ginkgo. You name it, that man has probably sketched it. Lost in thought, the man had heard something rustling in the bushes. He had paid little attention to the noise, but as it grew closer, he was slightly alarmed. "Is anyone there?" the man squeaked in fear. He had felt something watching him, eyes burning into the back of his neck. Maniac laughter filled the area, the man frozen in fear. "This isn't funny, this is cruel." He began to run, trying to avoid any roots hidden in the ground. In the forest, that is nearly impossible. A strong force pushed him forward, and the man felt a burning sensation in his back. He flailed his legs in a desperate attempt to free himself, but there was no use. He had given up, accepting that he would never be free. "This is the end. I will never see my family again." As police scanned his body the next morning, they were puzzled. Clearly, this was a homicide, but what was the motive? The man was a brand new neighbor. The police had talked to some of the neighbors around, but they all seemed quite fond of the man. He hadn't started any arguments, was very quiet, and tried to interact with as many neighbors as possible. They had decided to search for evidence around the forest. A small piece of black hair lay beside the body, but the man's hair was blonde. They could rule out some possible suspects, but they could not arrest somebody for having black hair. The case was unsolved, and time was not passing slowly. Shortly after, they had found another police officer. She was alive, but shaken. A large scratch was on her back, and a small, black piece of hair lay next to her. She had refused to speak about what happened, and they didn't have many leads on the case. The suspect had black hair, and they carried a weapon with them. They had decided that the suspect had tried to kill the police officer simply because she was on their back, but then why wouldn't they go after other police officers? The one they had attempted to kill had the least power, so there was no logical explanation for which the suspect had chosen to go after. They had been unable to detect fingerprints, or any DNA for the hair on both bodies. This seemed impossible. Was the murderer a creature, which didn't have DNA? Of course that was nonsense, they were just missing a piece of crucial evidence. How would a creature even be capable of murdering a human? Police became increasingly worried, as if the murderer could go on without being caught, then they would attempt to continue. As time passed, more and more people became injured, or even found dead. Each time, a small piece of black hair was found next to the body. It contained no DNA, and everybody who survived refused to speak about what had happened to them. The police noticed each injured person was female, and each person which died was male. They thought it was strange. Maybe it was a sexist female who committed these murders, or a gentleman male. The head police officer was tired of waiting, and decided to fish for the murderer himself. They had attempted to put cameras around the town, hoping that they would catch who had did this. But they hadn't been able to capture the murderer, and more people were growing more worried by the day. "Come and get me, you cold-blooded killer!" the man shouted, pointing his gun where he turned. "I'm not scared of some murderer who thinks they own the world." After time passed, the man had given up. He began to walk away, but he heard a rustling in the bushes. "Hey, you finally decided to mess with me," he had yelled. "Because I'm ready for it." He laughed. Seconds later the police officer had fallen to the ground, screeching in pain. "I knew I was risking something coming out in the forest, but not death. Oh Lord, please help me." At dawn, the police had found the man on the ground, a small black hair right next to the body. "Looks like we lost another one. He was foolish, but I didn't think he would try and pick trouble for himself," a detective had stated. "I thought he would have a little bit more sense, being the lead police officer of this case." Another police officer had walked up to him. He was a fresh police officer. "They think they can do anything they please. Trust me, I was him once. Sucks, he was a good one too. Who wants to call his parents?" Several people perked their heads up. "Go ahead, Ryan. Tell them he died with courage and honor." Out of curiosity, detectives had decided to look back on corpses. There was something very strange about each of them. Everybody had black hair. "This is weird. This has never happened before," the oldest detective had whispered. "This is inhumane." Suddenly, like on command, each corpse had opened their eyes. Each stood up in a robot-like motion, surrounding the detectives. "We are here for vengeance," all of them said in unison. "What do you mean?" "We are trying to protect you." The corpses ignored the comments, and surrounded the detectives. Almost like being controlled by someone, they fell to the ground. "No, you ruined souls, I am to destroy them." The detectives looked up. In front of them, a pale, distorted male stood. "Ah, you were tricked. Say goodbye, you fools." A boy lay in bed, sweat dripping down his face. He tried to close his eyes, but the horrific nature of his dream haunted him. Everything was in such detail, he couldn't shake it off. The bodies, surrounding the detectives, and how gruesome every injury looked. He had let out a terrible cry. "Mom!" he screamed. A few seconds later, his mother ran in. "Yes, sweetheart, are you okay?" the mother questioned. "Yes, I just had a really scary dream." His mother looked concerned. "What was it about, dear?" The boy glanced at her. "A serial killer." His mother hugged him close. "Well, when you were asleep, one had managed to get in. I called the police. Everything is okay now, but he was staring right at you, laughing."